Welcome to Dedicated. Today we're with Carl Hiaasen. Carl is an award-winning journalist and novelist. He got a typewriter for Christmas when he was 6 years old, and it's been full throttle ever since. His books are available in 34 languages, and as he says in characteristic humor, that's 33 more than he can read or write. Some of his better-known titles are Striptease and Bad Monkey. Both have been adapted for either the big or small screen. His latest book is called Fever Beach, also set in Florida, something he is known to do. Carl, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad we were able to catch you when you're up north on book tour.
When I'm awake on book tour, yeah. No, this is the timing worked out great. It did. I'm sort of just at the beginning of the tour, so I'm almost coherent.
Yeah. Well, and so the audience knows, it's a little early in the day. We are going to get after it with some gin and tonics here.
Oh my God.
I know a lot of people come in here like, wait a minute, this is not a prop, like this is actually happening.
No, it's breakfast. The breakfast of champions right here.
Yeah, as you were just saying, it's you have not actually had your breakfast yet, so this is it.
This is it. The juniper, the juniper breakfast.
That'll fortify you. Double lime?
No, single lime, please. Thank you. God, this is serious. I've never done a show where.
Well, I'm not sure Sirius knows it's actually happening that I'm smuggling booze in here.
Did you have any history as a bartender?
I did, yes.
Because you look like you know what you're doing.
I got a sort of a New Jersey Shore nightclub, if you can.
That'll be a strong drink then. That'll be a good one.
And this is, by the way, I should give a shout out here to our pal Chris Bojalian, who you may know. This is Barr Hill Gin. It's handcrafted in Vermont.
Oh, wow.
So that is some good gin.
They stomp on the juniper. And that's the handcrafting part. It's foot crafted, yeah.
Right. Great.
Right, yes. All right. Well, all right. Cheers. This will start the interview in the right way.
Start your motors.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
So I love doing the research on you for this conversation today, and learned a ton. Of course, I knew your name, and I had read some of your books even prior to reading Fever Beach, and I know about Bad Monkey and the shows. But we'll start at the beginning. You were born in Fort Lauderdale, oldest of 4 kids?
Yes, and it was very rural, and it was really on the edge of the Everglades at that point. I lived in...
It was not the spring break mecca.
There was spring break there, but I lived on the western part of the county in a place called Plantation. I grew up in. It was right on the edge, like cow pastures and swamp, and so my childhood was spent just out fishing and roaming around the wilderness, and it was terrific. There were no malls, we just, we collected snakes, which my mother was terrified of, but we'd had any number of snakes in the house at any given time.
That reminds me, have you ever been to Camp Nelson, Trapper Nelson's zoo on the Loxahatchee River?
No.
Have you heard of this thing?
I've heard of it, yeah.
You have to go. You'll set your next 5 books there. It's incredible. I went there once. You kayak out there down the Loxahatchee River, and this guy, Trapper Nelson, I think Vince Nelson or something, was a train hobo in the 1920s. And he moved out to the Loxahatchee. He started catching alligators and snakes.
Yeah.
Kept like a South Florida zoo when it was all rural out there. And people would go there. Like Gary Cooper would go there. I think, the heavyweight champions of the world would go there and visit this guy who became like a Florida celebrity. You've got to take a kayak ride down the river and check it out.
I will. I've not heard of it, but that's sort of what it was. It was just a great kind of childhood, and it was all outdoors. And now, of course, all that is concrete, but at the time it was special for us.
Yeah. And so it's a true story then, what I read online, that you got a typewriter at 6 years old for Christmas. And
my dad, I had asked for a typewriter, and I was sick, but not, to be fair, also had baseball glove, bikes, everything else. Right. But I loved reading, and I loved typing up little stories, and making up little stories, and I must have known at that age that my handwriting was going to be so horrible that I would need a typewriter. See, that's too. Dad got me a little manual typewriter then, and
what did your dad do?
My dad was an attorney, and my grandfather was an attorney, and he'd moved from North Dakota to Fort Lauderdale in 1922 and started one of the oldest law practices in the state. Yeah.
Before air conditioning? Or just
before air conditioning, before any of that. But he was so happy to get out of North Dakota for the weather. So it was an old Fort Lauderdale family, but I didn't. I was not cut out for the legal profession. I think my dad saw that at a very early age, and he said, "Sure, have a typewriter, go write." I mean, I wasn't headed that direction. So, but it was a unrecognizable place now. I mean, if you were there, you would never know that it was swamp. But
Was your dad married before he moved, or met your mom?
No, he met my mom in Florida. She was a school teacher and English teacher, and they met in Florida and got married in Fort Lauderdale. And
it's amazing how many people who come on the show have one or both parents who were either a teacher or a librarian or worked in a bookstore or something like that.
Well, my dad, myself, and my oldest son were all born in the same hospital in Fort Lauderdale. So some things didn't change. But anyway, I had a pretty lucky childhood. And I think at sort of even at that age, you could see the change coming, the boom time of Florida when everything was changing, everything was getting built up. And I think that's probably my anger and frustration about that started at a fairly young age, because, when you're a kid and you're watching right before your eyes places that,
rapid change.
You're right. The places you ride your bike to and go fishing or you're hiking, and all of a sudden there's bulldozers and concrete trucks and it's gone. I mean, I think it hits you pretty hard.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I grew up in suburban Philly and, in this sort of very suburban town, but miles away was this old DuPont estate. And the DuPonts had sort of moved on, but it was beautiful pasture land and cows. And I went back about 10 years ago to visit my mom, and it was all like condos and a Whole Foods. I'm like, oh my God, what happened to this beautiful scenery?
Yeah.
Total. And the traffic patterns, of course, changed completely.
Oh my gosh. I mean, now there's over 22 million people in the state of Florida. Wow. And when I was born, there was around 5 million in the entire state, and it's a huge state. So you think about that kind of growth that any place has to absorb that quickly, and you're going to see the sort of the cracks in the seams in the social structure. You're going to see, and then you know why it's crazy. Of course, it's insane. It's an unmanageable amount of growth they had to handle, and people coming from everywhere for all kinds of reasons moving there. And as when I got into the newspaper business, I mean, which was 1974 when I got out of school. It was a great time to be a journalist. I mean, everything was sort of popping, and Watergate was happening. Yeah. So there was a time of idealism, but also if you were in Florida, there was so much to cover.
Yeah.
And it's such a, there's this grand tradition of corruption. So there was always stuff to write about because, it was just, everything was for sale.
State and national level.
Yes, yeah,
it was like Louisiana, Florida.
Yeah. Everything was up for
Plus
sale.
you had Bob Greasy and the Dolphins doing well.
Yeah, that was. And so I feel like I was very lucky to hit it right then. Yeah. And also when newspapers were robust and big, the Miami Herald was one of the best in the country and huge circulation. And, I figure I lucked out with all that.
Yeah. So you went to Emory briefly and then transferred to University of Florida, and you got a journalism degree as your and that was your sort of
right.
Before you finished college, you married when you were still, I think, a teenager, right?
17, yeah.
You were 17 when you got married? So
I was a freshman in college, yes. High school sweetheart, yes. I don't feel like I missed anything in college, but I think what it did is centered me at a very early time. I mean, I wanted to get my degree. I was at Emory when that happened, and I was an English major, and it pretty much became clear that if I wasn't going to teach English or become an English professor, I wanted to be in journalism. They didn't have a journalism program in the University of Florida, which was also an in-state school for me, and it was much less expensive. And they had a great, and still do, a great journalism program. So I transferred after 2 years. But at that point, I had a 2-year-old, and when the family gets thinking pretty early on about, maybe I'm not going to have a fraternity life. Maybe I'm just going to work my ass and try to get out of school and get a job.
Yeah, I've got people depending on me.
Yeah, and I had, at that point, I'd graduated to a little electric Smith Corona. The old.
Did you save the original
6-year-old
type?
I did. My mom, I think she got rid of it when she got rid of all my baseball cards. As soon as I went to college. Yeah, I know. I think she did. No, I didn't save it.
Okay. That should be the library bequeathment that you eventually
No. I got home from my first semester of college. My whole room was cleaned out. Everything and all the stuff that I'd squirreled away was gone. So
I still have my old baseball card collection, which is I actually cherish it. I still leaf through it. I have it in the notebooks with the sleeves.
That's how oh my God.
You stick the cards in.
I had so many. I don't even want to think. It makes me sick. Mom didn't know any better. She just said, we need the room. Throw that out.
So you get out of University of Florida, journalism degree, and as you say, started at the Miami Herald. What was your beat there?
No, I started actually at a small newspaper in Cocoa, Florida, called Cocoa Today, which is now called Florida Today. But it was really a template for USA Today. It was owned by Gannett, and it was one of the few newspapers that had been recently started. I think it was started in 67 or 68 when I went there. So I was there for 2.5 years doing all kinds of stuff. And then the Herald offered me a job. I wasn't, and it gets back to what we were talking about. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back to South Florida because it was changed. Every time I went back to see my folks and my family, I didn't recognize it. And it just was, it was disturbing. It wasn't like I remembered it. It had only been a couple of years. But the Herald at the time was, one of the great newspapers. It would have been really stupid to turn the job down, especially with the family. Yeah. And then my father had just passed away suddenly, so my mom was alone down there. And I thought I would be closer to her. Mm-hmm. So it kind of coincided. So it was a couple of months after Dad died that I moved back down there and took a job in the Broward Bureau of the Herald. So it was back in my backyard, basically.
That's sort of like Palm Beach, Jupiter stuff? Or?
No, it's just north of Dade. It's excuse me. Broward is Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, right. And Plantation to the west, which is now a big municipality, but at the time it was just a little town where I lived. But so that's how I got to the Herald, and that would have been in 76, yeah.
Okay, so college, 74, brief spot, brief stint prior to the Herald. And then were you doing politics, crime?
I started on the city desk, just whatever comes across the transom, which is the great way to start. And then I moved down to Miami office, and they sat me next to Gene Miller, who had run 2 Pulitzer Prizes, and it was like going back to journalism school. And so I worked a city desk there, and then I went to work at the Sunday magazine. We had a great Sunday magazine called Tropic, and they had just hired a guy named Dave Barry to work there, and that's what Dave and I became friends. I worked there for a while. Then I worked on the investigations team for a couple of years, which was really the high point for me. And then I started doing the column, and I want to say like 85, I started doing a column, and I wrote the column till 2021.
Stephen King has this really interesting book that I'm sure you know of and probably read called On Writing, and he talks about a stint in his career very similar to that, where one of the takeaways of the book is that was sort of like boot camp for writing. You learn how to write economically.
And on deadline. Because the newspaper editors couldn't care less if you had a bad night or if you had a fight at home, or if we need 800 words by 3:00. Mm-hmm. That's what you did, and so the transition. And I'd always wanted to write books, and in fact, when I was in college, I worked on a couple of novels, sort of as a ghostwriter, helping a doctor at Emory who was a good friend of mine, and both the books got published. Didn't have my name on them, but it was that was a big boost. I thought maybe I could do this, but then the newspaper work was so busy, so I didn't start up again until I got down to the Herald. Started working on books on the side with a friend of mine. Yeah,
I wanted to ask you. So you co-wrote the first 3 books, and your sort of co-author debut was in '81. With
Bill Montalbano. But the book was called Powder Burn. It was about the cocaine wars, and this was before. It was based on all the books that Bill and I did. Sort of were out of our own reporters' notebooks, and the cocaine wars had just started in Miami, and I had written a profile of a Colombian assassin, a drug assassin, who'd been sent to Miami. And he'd been arrested like 5 times under 5 different names, and I always kept letting him go. And his nickname was El Loco, of course, but it was the first of many El Locos to come. But I'll never forget, his name was Conradio Valencia, and I wrote about him. We didn't know where he was or anything. And I wrote the story. We had all these different mug shots, and then Bill said to me, "We should write a book about this stuff that's going on. I mean, shootouts in the streets and everything else." And I said, "Yeah." And collaborating is tough enough.
I was going to say, did you have reservations about collaborating on a sort of a long form?
He was such a gifted writer. Yeah, I did a little bit, but I thought, and our styles were different. But when we sat down together, like you or I'd be sitting here now, we had chapters and characters, each of us kind of assigned. And when we would he was a foreign correspondent. So we'd get together and I'd say, "No, Bill, the Chevy was blue in this chapter and you've got it driving a white Chevy." But we'd also, because of the newspaper business and the editing is brutal, we just brutally edit each other. You're used to it. You have to have a thick skin.
Alternating chapters to write the first draft?
Yeah. Well, this is how it worked. Is we wrote 5 chapters like that of Powder Burn, because Bill said, "Look at Rosie, that was his wife. Rosie wants a new swimming pool. How much do you think we can get for this?" And I said, "I have no idea." He goes, "All right, well, let's just do 5 chapters. So we didn't want to put a lot of time in and see if you can sell it." And Pete Hamill was a good friend of mine in New York. So I called Pete and I said, "Well, I got these 5 chapters." And he goes, "I'll just send it to my agent." His agent was Lynn Nesbitt, was her favorite. But she, of course, why would she read it? She gave it to her assistant, Esther Newberg, who called me like 3 weeks later and said, "Okay, I sold your book." I said, "You're kidding me." I said, "Wow." She says, "Yeah, it was for someone, modest amount, but for us, newspaper business, God, it was a fortune." So I called Bill and I said, "You won't believe this. I mean, they sold the book." And there's a pause. He goes, "Guess that means we got to finish it." And I said, "Yeah, now we got to finish it." But she got her swimming pool. Rosie got the swimming pool, and then we ended up doing 3 books together like that. But at some point, he was going to China. He was one of the first Western journalists that was going to be in Beijing, and it became impractical. And I wanted to go off and do my own thing, and Bill did too. But it was great training working with someone. He was a great editor and a great writer, and we would just. And the trick was nobody knew which sections. Nobody that knew us knew who was writing what section.
That's interesting.
Especially the sex scenes. We made it clear that he was going to take the fall for me if my wife questioned me about where that scene came from, and I was going to do the same for him. He would just say, "I wrote it," and I would say, No, he wrote that. I don't know where that came from." That's how we got around that.
So I haven't read Powder Burn. I'm going to have to go back and read that, because I don't know if your writing style has evolved. But it's amazing you say that, because there's nobody writing like you now. So the fact that someone could be indistinguishable from you in one of these early books is remarkable.
Well, they were pretty straight thrillers. I mean, and they had to be outlined, which I don't do anymore. And I mean, and especially working with something else, you had to actually have it all planned out. It was a lot of discipline, which when I started writing, I abandoned all that. I said, "I'm not doing it now. I'm just winging this, because I don't know. I don't want to know what my characters are going to do." The
pantser, which is a term I just recently learned, writing without seat of your pants instead of writing by a.
And you'd be surprised how many writers do that. And I've quoted him a lot, but Elmore Leonard was a friend of mine. I was at a book event with him once, and everybody's raising their hands, asking him questions, and he was just such a gentleman, but he had such a dry sense of humor. And they said, "Hey, Mr. Leonard, do you know how your books are going to end when you start writing them?" And he just deadpan. He said, "Why would I write them if I knew how they were going to end?"
That's a good line.
And that's the way I feel about it too.
So 85 is your solo debut. By the way, these we're nowhere even near noon, and these gin and tonics are tasting pretty good. I think Jimmy Buffett would be proud of us.
He would.
He'd probably have rum, I guess, instead of Jim. But.
Oh, he would, yeah, or tequila, yeah.
And you have written, and you knew him well,
yeah.
And have written with him, so we'll get into that too. But so 85 is your solo debut.
Yeah, with tourist season, and it's interesting. The editor, because he'd been editing Bill and me together, didn't know. Even he didn't. 86, maybe. 86 or 85. He didn't know which of us what one of us as a single voice would sound like, because we'd been writing together, and he really took a chance, because tour season was much different than the 3 thrillers. It was way different, and it was. I don't know if he knew what to make of it. It's sort of the anti-hero. Here was sort of a deranged newspaper columnist, and I'd started working on this book before I started the column at the Herald. I was writing about a crazy columnist in the novel when I started writing the column, And I went into the executive editor of the paper. I said, look, I don't know if this is going to cause a problem, but I'm doing this book. And because he'd said, you want to start writing a column? And I said to him, well, yeah, I do, but I'm writing this book. And there's this column. A columnist goes around the bend. And he kind of laughed at it. I don't know if he thought the book was going to get done or thought there was any problem with it. So it's interesting. That character of Skip Wiley, which Jimmy Buffett wrote a song about, existed as a columnist before I did. I didn't model the character after myself. If anything, I modeled myself after the character. Yeah.
That's funny. So you did become friends with Jimmy Buffett.
Yep.
So the audience knows, if you don't already, nearly every book is set, maybe every book is set in Florida.
It's the only place I've ever lived.
I mean, really, it's amazing how you have brought that onto the page as a character in the books themselves. But so you've gotten to know Jimmy Buffett pretty well. And also Warren Zevon. Did you write a song with him?
I wrote a couple songs with Warren Zevon. He had come to a book signing of mine. Well, getting back to Jimmy, when tourist season came out, Jimmy had gotten an advance copy or something. Anyway, he called me from a freeway in L.A. This was before anybody had car phones. He had one of those big box phones that was, like
from the Lethal Weapon movie.
Yeah, right, or a Maxwell smartphone, or I don't know what. And he said, hey, I want to option your book. And I said, well, it had already been optioned.
Jimmy Buffett wanted to.
Yeah, and it had already been optioned. He said, oh, shit, okay, well, I'm coming. I'll be back in Florida in a little bit. Let's go to a basketball game or something. So we became very, very good
That's
friends.
How you got to know him.
Yeah, I knew I'd met him before, but just hanging out with him after that.
Was he making films at the time?
No, he wasn't. But he was an entrepreneur, and he was smart, and he knew people in the business, but he ultimately produced a movie based on one of my kids' books called Hoot, and Jimmy was in it. He played an 8th grade teacher in it. But at that time, so we would just go to ball games or we go fishing, and he was just.
Is he as we imagine?
Exactly. Yeah. The fun factor was very high, which that was he lived exactly the life you thought, but he was also incredibly generous, and he was a very good writer, and he read everything, and so the lyrics were important to him, and it was the same way with Zevon. Warren just showed up at a book signing of mine in L.A. because I had mentioned one of his songs and I had a character of mine reference one of his songs in a novel, and he wanted to thank me. And afterwards, we went out to have coffee, and what we talked about was writing. He was also a voracious reader, and it's interesting. I mean, I'm not a musician, so they would do the music, but they were so interested in the lyrics and the timing of the lyrics and phrases that it was fun to be around them because they're always thinking like that. Warren and I did a song together called Seminole Bingo, and it was on an album called Mutineer. But the title of the song, he was playing Lauderdale. He was playing a club in Lauderdale, and so I was going to take him over to the club, and I stopped. He was at this big tourist hotel where they had all the little pamphlets. You ever seen those in Florida where they have water skiing, the sea aquarium? When you're in the lobby, you can see where all the things you can do. And there was one of them that said, Seminole Bingo. And Warren snatched. He goes, what's that? I said, this was before Hard Rock or anything, but the Seminole tribe had a huge bingo facility down on the same property where the Guitar Hotel is and everything now. Mm-hmm. And I was explaining to Warren, no, it's a bingo hall run by the Seminole Indo tribes. He goes, I got to write a song with that title. And he stuck it in his jacket.
Seminole Bingo.
And when he got back to L.A., he started working on it. And then that was before emails and things. So we were faxing each other lyrics and changing lyrics. And that's how we did a couple songs. So it's
a fun way to have the writing process. Why don't let's go into process a little bit because when you write a novel, that's what you're going to do for the next year, 3 years, 5 years. We're writing a song. I suppose that's what you're going to do for the shower or a week at the most or something.
Yeah,
it could be longer.
And so much depends on the music and the rhythms. It's different, but it's also the same because it's the language. What you're looking for, how something, in the case of a book, hits your eye. In the case of a lyric, your ear. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's the exact same muscle, but it's the same instinct to pick up on things. And the process, for me, is chaotic to writing. I don't
for the novel, the song, or anything.
Excuse me again. Yeah. Well, it's a little chaotic because I start with the novels. I start with I start building a cast of characters in my head. I don't know. I haven't have a story really yet, but if you live in Florida, there's just, and even read the news, vaguely follow it, there's just doesn't a day go by where you don't see something on TV. You say, God, that would be somebody you would find in a novel. And you sort of file it away or you make a note. And so I assemble this motley cast of characters just on random ideas and sort of throw them onto this little stage in my head and see where it's going to go. But that's sort of the fun of it, because they bump into each other. You don't know what they're going to do. And sometimes the characters disappoint you, and they have to disappear by chapter 11 because, and then other times they surprise you and they take on a different momentum in the book. But for me, that keeps it fresh. It's also a tight wire because obviously you want the books to be funny, but you want people turning the page. You don't want them turning the pages, so there has to be an element of suspense. All that's got to get built in. I didn't want to go back to writing books where it was a formulaic sort of detective books where you have the same sort of Joe detective or Jill detective character, because I get bored easily, and I just thought, no, I want everything to be a little chaotic, and I'll figure out how to end it somewhere 2/3 of the way through the manuscript.
Yeah. It's interesting that you evolved from outlining to not outlining. And people who've been on the show, of course, as you know, there are all sorts.
Yeah.
How did you decide, I think I'll have, more energy in the book
Yes.
if I have no outlining?
That's exactly right, Doug. That's exactly right. I felt in a way that the outlines were like handcuffs. And if something happened where a character surprised me or I got another idea and I had to break out of the outline, that it would throw off the whole rest of the book. This way, I could just sort of follow. And sometimes it's a dead end. You go back, you rewrite. But I felt more energized. I mean, there's plenty of times when you panic and you think, well, where is this going? Or how am I going to end this? Or how is this going to fit together? And I wish I had the discipline sometimes to do the outlines that some writers do. But for me, it just worked better because it gave the characters more freedom. And I'm one of those writers that I would wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, saying, wait, no, okay, why didn't, and I'll, I'm going to do that when I get back to the office. This is going a different way. I've just got a different idea. I wanted to be able to make those moves without having to reconstruct like a skeleton, the whole thing.
Yeah. I think that I've been thinking a lot about it because, for example, a recent interview on the show was J.D. Barker, who's co-written some books with James Patterson. And Patterson's like, we got to do the outline. And Barker's like, I'm a pantser. And so they're like, all right, well, pants one, and then we'll do one in an outline. And in the end, Barker sort of moved over to being more of an outline, I guess, in the end. But I think it really takes that true creative gene to face the blank page, no outline, no tightrope, like this is what I'm going to do. It's sort of a different ability to, like, I would be very stressed out, I think.
It does get stressful, and it's a little crazy. And I have not only admiration, but envy for people, and I know Jim, and he is an outliner, and he's meticulous. He's not just a writer, but he's an editor. I mean, he can see where things slow down, and he's big on pace, and I am too. And I think it's a result of the newspaper business because you don't have a lot of space to tell a story, and you got to get to it, and you got to keep people interested, even if you're writing about the municipal waste fees hike or whatever. Your job is to get people to read the story, the newspaper. But so I appreciate all that, but I just rely on my characters. And in the beginning, the first parts of the book are always slow. Like the first 5 or 6 chapters, I don't know how many times I will, hundreds of times, go through them, and every time make changes and changes and changes before I show anything to my editor, because new ideas are coming, or a character isn't working. I'll agonize over every bit of dialogue, no matter how simple or mundane it might be, just because I want it to move. You want it to move. And I mean, every time in the middle of a novel, I say, why do I do it like this? Why didn't I map this out?
By the way, it's interesting you mentioned Elmore Leonard earlier, because you and he are two of the great dialogue writers out there.
That's a very high honor. And I remember reading, La Brava, which was set in South Beach when it came out.
Yeah, yeah.
And he just blew me away. And he had such a gift for, and such an ear. And I think, in my case, the newspaper work helped because you're covering things all the time. You hear how people really speak. your line of work the same way. You know, you're out in the street, you're bumping. If you're at a crime scene or you're anywhere, you know that cops talk a certain way, paramedics talk, and it's not always in perfect sentences and paragraphs, and they're not always giving a monologue, and it's fragmented and it's chaotic. And Leonard had a great way of capturing that. I think if you've written in a journalist notebook enough times when a breaking news story is, you'll see. Wait a minute. This is how they're talking, and this is how it's going to sound, right? And they're not always grammatical. People, when they get excited, aren't always grammatical. But so everything can't be perfect. But it would be like nowadays if you see reading a transcript of a presidential press conference, you're lucky to find one complete sentence in there, much less a complete thought. Yeah. But that's how the mind is. But to get the authentic part of it in print, where people are reading it, going, "Yeah, that's how that's how they talk." It's tough. It's hard.
Yeah. How about editing for you and editing yourself? Do you edit as you go, or you sort of sprint to the finish and come back?
No, I edit as I go, over and over and over again. I don't do a draft and then go back and rewrite. I almost do a chapter at a time, but even as I'm doing it, I'll write. Like if I was writing today, I'd write, and then tomorrow I would go in and eviscerate what I wrote today, right, or polish or cut. And then the next day I do the same thing. And then when I thought it was okay, I'd move on to the next section. But I don't do the whole draft thing and the sort of dramatic, all right, I've got to start all over.
Yeah.
No. I to me, if I know it's not right, or know it can be better, which it always can be at the end of the day, then I know that I'm going to go back.
Did you let anyone else see it before you finished it?
Well, my editor, I have a great editor at Knopf, Peter Gethers, and before him, Sonny Mehta was my editor. And we had a system. I'd send about 5 or 6 chapters at a time that I thought were pretty well polished. And then the feedback I would get is, I just want to know if I was going off track too badly, or if it had not made sense, or a character wasn't working. And so then I could go back and fix it and then keep going, because I didn't want to turn in 30 chapters and say, oh God, in chapter 3, we got to get rid of him the whole book. That happened to me before, where I had to go back and take a character out that Sonny rightly pointed out didn't belong in that particular novel. And it was painstaking to have to.
How long have you been with this editor?
Peter, well, Sonny passed away a few years ago, so I got probably about 4 years with Peter, but they've been with Knopf since, I think, 1990. Right. So, but that's my system. And then I'll show my agent probably not all the same pages, but she'll get a bunch of pages and she'll say, okay, I don't want to see it again until it's done. She's all right. Yeah. So
any other trusted readers in the cabal there?
No. And it's because I'm horribly insecure. If I gave it to,
right, it could lead to marital problems.
Well, it's just, if I gave it to a friend, and I know so many writers, so many incredibly talented writers, and if one of them came back and said, I don't think this is working, it would put me into a tailspin. I'm so horribly insecure. Most writers are cowards, let's face it, and so I would just rather be out on that tightrope by myself. And I think after a time you get enough confidence to know when it's working or not. I'll show when I'm done with like the first draft, the real, we're pretty 80% there or something. I'll show it to my wife, but what is she going to say? She hates it. No, that's like an easy. That's like an easy play, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a little.
Yeah.
What about what you're reading while you're writing? Would you ever go grab an old Elmore Leonard novel while you're in the process of drafting?
I don't, and I don't do it on purpose because I don't want to be unconsciously affected. The two things if I'm writing, I try to read mostly if I'm reading anything, it's nonfiction, just something so different from what I'm doing, because I don't want anything that another novelist would do to either get in my head or again, getting back to the cowardly part of this. What happens if you read a novel while you're writing a novel is that if it's a really great novel, then you feel like a fraud. You feel like an imposter, like you want to rip up your whole manuscript. But if it's a really crappy novel, if it's a really shitty novel and it's by like a popular author, then you think you're Hemingway. Yeah. Oh, I can do better than that. And both of those feelings are deadly. So I just try not to read much fiction while...
It's like treat those two imposters the same expression.
Right, because it can affect your everything you do, and it's hard enough to be in your own head, and not lose the narrative tone, the narrative voice that you're in. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to be consistent, and it's hard when you're writing satire. Sometimes you don't always feel funny. These days, you might not always feel like
being funny on the page is one of the hardest things to do, and you're actually very, very good at it. We talked a bit about songwriting, but how about screenwriting? Have you ever taken a stab?
No, and I've had lots of scripts written on books over the years. When we were doing Hoot, which was the first book I did for young readers, and Jimmy was involved, and Will Schreiner, who's a great writer and director, was doing the script, and he was great and he grew up in Lauderdale like I did, so it was all like Florida brothers doing the thing, and Will would send me draft after draft of the script, and I would do notes in the margin or do some dialogue suggestions, and he was great about using them or not using them. But in terms of starting from scratch, it's just such a different discipline. And here's the other thing is, and you know this, when you're writing for a film studio or for TV, or whether it's Netflix or whatever it is, you're writing for a committee. Mm-hmm. Your script is going to, and you go into a room, there's like 9 people sitting there, and they all have notes on your script. And you just want to hang yourself right on the spot. In my case, I'm writing for me and my editor, and I have never had any dinner or lunch with a screenwriter who didn't say to me, you know what I really want to do? I want to write novels. Mm-hmm, exactly. Because it would belong, truly,
it would, the boss. You don't even have direct reports. You're just doing it.
And it would belong to them. Yeah. And you wouldn't have the committee. Now, because I still think some of the best films are written and directed by the same person with the same vision, and not that they don't show it to anybody, but that have the freedom to just, like when you watch the Coen Brothers movies, nobody's messing around with the Coen Brothers. They get to do their thing, and it shows when you see the film.
That just reminded me, like we were looking at houses the other day. I will land this plane. This is a weird start to it though, but we were looking at houses, and someone had owned it, and they'd added something on, and they'd added something else on, and you could tell it wasn't the original architect. It was like 4 architects who did different things. He's like, it's more of a camel than a horse, And so it's like, I feel like the Coen, written and directed, that's the horse, as opposed to the writer's room with 9 people coming in with the camel. And
I understand, like with Bad Monkey, the TV series, you've got to have a group of writers, and hopefully they're on the same page. And when you have somebody like Bill Lawrence who's running the writer's room, the product is good, but it can also go the other direction. I remember I was talking to a guy who was working on a movie. I'm going to go back about 30 years. It was, and I don't want to say it too much. It was a sequel to a very, very big comedy, and it was called Something Something 2. And he said, yeah, we got 22 writers that have taken a pass at this script, and he says, there isn't 22 jokes in the whole movie. But that would be so dispiriting. You put in a lot of effort. It's hard, and they're structured. There's 3 acts. I mean, you can't, and in my case, they're taking a book manuscript that may be 350 or 400 pages long, and for a movie, then the screenplay is going to be 110 pages, 120 pages.
Yeah, that's amazing to me. And by the way, the sort of formula of that, like it's 100. When you say 120 pages, like. Maybe it's off by 1. Like it's really
it's got to be. But with at least the TV series, like with Bad Monkey, there were 10 episodes in the first season, so you can actually develop the characters. There's so much more you can do with streaming TV now, and that's why you see, I think, a lot of really good writers doing that work, and really big actors going to that format now.
There's certain writers' rooms where I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in a great way, and in others just to observe the fiasco. But to see the writers' room for The Sopranos or Boardwalk Empire is
oh my God! Favorites. Oh, that's terrific. Fun. Yeah, I mean those are, and they are all legitimately, seriously gifted, talented writers to be able to do that. And then, but as you know, there's a ton of demand for content right now with all the streaming services. So you get some very, very high level stuff, and then you get some stuff that isn't great.
Feels like mostly not great lately. Netflix is pouring out these shows that feel like they were written in a day, and you're just like, my goodness.
But that's that, to get more subscribers, you get more, the content they think. So it's a big push, and I've been lucky because they stay in touch with me, the writers on the show. And I know enough to keep a certain distance, too, because there's nothing really worse than here's the author of the book coming in. And I know in their head, they're going, oh, God. But if I just say, look, you're sticking to the spirit of the book, the character's funny, and Florida looks right.
And nobody knows Florida like you do.
And you're getting Florida right. That's all. I mean, that's all I can ask. I have dealt with that.
Did Elmore Leonard live in, like you mentioned La Brava, which I was in a book club where we read that one and we loved it. But is he a Florida guy or not?
At the time, he had a condominium in Delray Beach, and he used to go down there and play tennis. He never really lived there. He spent a lot of time there, but he was also famous. He had a very gifted researcher who, if Dutch didn't really feel like going somewhere, he'd just send him for a week or two, and then that guy would take voluminous notes like a reporter would, and come back, and Dutch say, okay. He did a book.
How did he get Dutch out of Elmore?
That was his nick. That's what we called him, you know.
Okay. Is Patterson also? He's a South Florida guy.
Yeah, he does. He lives in Palm Beach.
Are you guys near enough that you hang around?
No, I don't see him. I've seen him at events and things, but I don't see him. He's in Palm Beach, and I don't. I live a couple hours north of him, but and he also has he's up here part of the year, and I mean he's got so many people he's working with now. But at the events I see him, and he's a huge donor to libraries and reading charities and reading groups.
And independent bookstores, too.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So he's very, very involved in that. And he's also, I don't know how many books a year, but it's, I'm
writing with presidents.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm lucky to squeeze out, a novel every couple of years. I feel like it's torture.
Well, it shows because it's brilliant stuff. I mean, there's no way you can just crank these things out. I'll hold it up again here, Fever Beach, because the coloring is classic Hiaasen.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Castelli, pops off the...
They did a great job with the cover, really.
One of the things, just from the front page, first page, only in Florida could they possibly still be hitchhiking. Is that does that actually happen?
You see them hitchhiking.
I remember hitchhiking in the 70s, not myself, but seeing hitchhikers. But I feel like that doesn't even happen up here anymore.
There are certain courageous personalities that do it and still make it to wherever they're going, But that happens. The hitchhiker.
Well, tell us a bit about the books. I know you bring back a couple of characters. Your fans' favorites, and
one of them, the character that comes back, he was in a book called Sick Puppy, and his name was Twilly Spree, and he inherited a ton of money through ways that his grandfather was sort of a miner and a mining industry, the ways that Twilly didn't approve of. He grew up in Florida, saw it change. He's kind of pissed off like me. But he's got a ton of money, and he doesn't really spend it on anything except justice. He just lawsuit. He's rich enough to go up against the developers, but he also has a horrible temper. So he gets pulled into this story. I started out with this because this book actually started when I had, where I live, one morning I went out to get a newspaper, and on the driveway there's a little Ziploc baggie, and it's weighted down with rice in this case so it doesn't blow away, and inside is this horrible anti-Semitic screed, and it's zipped into this Ziploc baggie, and every driveway on my block had one, and it had been happening in certain neighborhoods in Palm Beach County as well. And but I picked it up and, of course, disgusted, revolted. But at the same time, my mind is like, okay, who are these idiots? Because, one guy's driving, one guy's throwing. And there's some crappy little apartment where, and one guy's holding the baggie open for the other guy's pouring the rice in. This is a project. Right. And then what are they hoping to accomplish? People are going to pick up the baggie and read this and go, "Oh,
I'm persuaded."
And now I'm convinced. I mean, the level of idiocy was so supreme, but a lot of work had gone into this. So I thought, maybe the two guys that are doing this, whoever they are, maybe it would be fun to imagine their lives. And so I invented these two characters who they're starting their own white supremacy group because one of them's gotten blackballed from the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. He was in on January 6th on the uprising, and he committed a terrible faux pas in the Capitol. He was one of the guys that was defecating in the Capitol, but he accidentally did it on the statue of a Confederate general. And so Proud Boys,
just love everybody.
He's gone. He can't get into any of the groups now. So he's starting his own group. Yeah. And I just thought, and there is that. And it was also kind of a morbid curiosity on my part about, sort of the nature of hate and to some of these people, because Florida produced more January 6th defendants than any other state.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and maybe it's because they were stupid enough to put all their faces on. They might have been the dumbest people there, so that they got caught easy. Whatever, our state would produce the most. And I thought, well, so that's a pervasive kind of thing going on, and when you get down to the whole kind of the white supremacy thing, which is, for instance, some of the groups espouse and try to have conversations, and they don't articulate very well. It's a grievance, but they're not sure where it came from, and it's usually their own lives are going pretty lousy. So, so I was trying to sort of dig into what these guys must talk about while they're driving around throwing these stupid pamphlets. I mean, what is the level of discourse? How the deep philosophers that they must be.
You let us sort of eavesdrop into imagining. Yeah, that, and you're exactly right. Like from either edge, it's a grievance. What's gonna?
And so where did it come from? Yeah. What happened in your life that you think this is going to be the solution? And I mean and it's hard because it's kind of a moving target. The political aspect of it is, but it's real and it exists. And they eventually did arrest some guys in South Florida for that. Now, I don't know if they're the same guys the same people that came through our neighborhood or not, but they got them in their, shockingly, in their pickup truck. And at the time, all they were getting them for was littering, because there wasn't a specific hate crime associated with, no matter how awful what they were doing was the laws in Florida. So they had to pass a law making it illegal to do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's where the story started in my head, and then Twilly sort of gets involved. He brushes up against them, and they're planning something big. If you're launching, for anybody who's listening, if you're launching a white supremacist organization, you got to get headlines. You got to get kind of ahead of the curve, and so they found an election they wanted to steal, a minor congressional election up in the Panhandle of Florida, and we had the candidate who's an incumbent congressman. Is kind of a bumbler. For instance, he doesn't know how Venmo works, so that when he's communicating with prostitutes, he has an open Venmo account because he's a moron. and that would never happen in Florida. Of course, we would never have anybody like that on Congress or nominated to be the head of the Justice Department.
I think it's become the norm. I mean, Florida, I think the rest of the states are catching up.
Mm-hmm.
So you're on a bit of a roll with book to film. Has there been early conversations for Fever Beach?
Some.
I know you got something going with Skinny Dip, maybe.
Yeah. Bill Lawrence again, who is doing Bad Monkey. There's doing a second season of Bad Monkey, but he always wanted to do Skinny Dip as well. So that's going on, and
how's it working with Vince Vaughn? He's
very funny.
Early days of Swingers, he's been one of my favorites.
He was so perfect for the part of Andrew Yancy in that. I mean, I don't ever imagine actors when I'm writing. I don't. I know. Yeah. I'm being serious. I don't think about who would make a great. Who would you cast in this role? I can barely. In my mind, they've just got a different look. But
that's a question I had, because sometimes when it's been a while since I was doing any fiction, but I would pick a face. And it could be a public face, and that would be the face in my mind when I was writing it. It would sort of help me to sort of, I don't know, get the voice.
In my case,
do you ever do that?
Not face so much, but in my case, some of the characters are characters that I've bumped up against in either in journalism or as friends of mine in real life. Mm-hmm. And I don't see them physically as much, but I know what their spirit was and their way of doing things, and some of the craziest stuff in the novels was stuff that I knew had really happened and that friends of mine had been involved in. Mm-hmm. So I tried to stick close to what they sounded like and what they were talking, but not so much physically. But when they called me, they had a couple different actors, and then they said, well, Vince Vaughn is interested in this, and I just thought, I think he'd be great. Actually, I was just thinking of the Yancy character, and it took about 8 years for this to get done. So. I think you put things on the back burner in your head because I had like a real job to keep writing, and I was working still at the newspaper, and so I said, well, God, I think he'd be great at it. And then he was just his voice, his manner. He really has that way about him. It was great casting. That's one of the things Bill Lawrence does so well, and even with Ted Lasso and Scrubs and Shrinking. I mean, the casting is always phenomenal. You know,
I was talking to some of the guys here at SiriusXM before you got here about Vince Vaughn. He's of course hilarious and a great comedic actor, but he can do anything. He's just a talented actor. Period.
Yeah, he's very versatile, and he's he got very into the part. And
will you ever be able to divorce him from the character going forward? Or
yeah, see, that's interesting.
Inhabits it now?
No, that's right. That's what happens. Once you see it I think I'm like anybody else. Once you see it on the screen, I'll always think of Yancy that way. And there's another book that that character appears in called Razor Girl, and I can't see anybody but Vince now in that part. But that's how good he is at it. I think it could go the other way if it wasn't good. It was something you would block it out of your mind. But he's very good at those shows. Funny, and they had a great soundtrack. They got Tom Petty's family to let use a bunch of.
So is that why you did the Tom Petty guest?
Yeah. They cut out the soundtrack was all these great covers of Tom.
So the audience knows Carl guest DJ.
Tom's daughter Adria was very nice, and I emailed her and I said, this would be the highlight of me for my whole experience with this TV show if I could just get an hour as a guest DJ on Tom Petty radio, and they let me do it. It was a gas, yeah.
Cool. Best concert I've ever been to was Tom Petty at the Fillmore in like '92.
Oh my God, he was
telling stories in between songs. Such a good entertainer.
I saw him down in Florida. It was just a couple months before he passed away. It was that last tour I saw him, and he was great as always. But anyway, that was a kick for me, and because I do like that's the music that I like, and so it was. And I never got to meet him, so this was even better.
All right, how about a sip of gin before we go into the lightning round?
Oh, the lightning round. Oh God, here we go. I need more than a sip of gin for this.
This is going to be good. Wow, it's going to be a very interesting day now that we've put down a gin and tonic at this hour of the morning. All right, lightning round. Your favorite book as a kid?
It was a series. I read the Hardy Boys series. I read every single one of them probably a couple times.
They were same for me. I was Frog and Toad, then Hardy Boys, then I think Lord of the Rings, and then
you were much more ambitious. I would just go back and read, Secret of the Old Mill again. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Wow, that brought it right back. That was a great grab on the title.
Yeah.
I tried to get my kids to read it, and they never really. They
no.
Were like one. They didn't.
Once the era of Harry Potter came along and thing. I mean, I would read those to the kids, but the Hardy, it was the same thing. It was like, they were so. The writing was so great.
Yeah. Franklin Pierce,
F.W. Dixon,
Dixon.
But he's he wasn't
that. Was like 10 different people, right?
No, it was one guy, and he was a Canadian author who took that as a side hustle. He was working on his own novels.
One guy did every book.
Yep.
I thought it just became like.
Well, towards the end, he passed away eventually. But the first big good rush of Hardy Boys was
all one guy.
And he'd been interviewed, and he had mixed feelings about the whole thing because it was what he was doing just to make extra money, and it became this huge thing. And that's not his name, but and he finally passed away. But he wanted to be known. Who doesn't for their own work? And it was just no, we want another Hardy. He got paid like I don't know $500 for the first one, something like that.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, he spawned one writing career.
He did.
The book or books you're reading now, and I know you're on tour, so it might be tough.
The book I was reading before I went on tour was we were just talking about Heartbreaker by Mike Campbell, the guitarist for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. He's written a book about a memoir of touring with the band and Dylan and all this stuff. So it's nonfiction, but it's a great read, and a lot of cool inside stuff about.
Learn something new about Tom Petty.
Yeah, well, just about the craft and how hard they worked on a single song, on a single lyric, and that's what. You hear a song, it sounds so breezy and easy on the radio, but how much they agonize over. I mean, that from a writer's point of view, it's very interesting.
Oh, cool. Heartbreaker
by Mike Campbell.
Least attended book event ever.
Okay, Blytheville, Arkansas. It was a Saturday afternoon at a bookstore, and the Razorbacks were playing the Sooners that day. And so guess who was going to bookstores? Nobody. And it was also in the same.
That is a marketing fail by the bookstore, by the way.
It was in the same venue as a big chili cook-off, and I was sitting in the bookstore doing absolutely nothing. And they came in, they said, "Hey, well, you got some, you want to come be a judge in the chili cook-off?" And I declined because, first of all, in case somebody might have walked in and wanted to buy a book. And the last thing that happened to me there, they said, "Well, we have a tradition. Our authors sign these folding chairs, and John Grisham comes in all the time, and they brought down John Grisham's chair that he had signed." Like a little folding chair. And they said, "Would you sign one?" And there's nobody to sit in it but me. But I said, "Sure, I'd be honored to do anything John Grisham did," and I signed it. But that was
At what point in your career was this?
Further along than you would imagine. I don't remember which book it was for. I just have I just remember it as being, it took a while to bounce back from that one.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, I don't even know if the Razorbacks won or not. I was on a plane pretty quick out of there.
Oh, it's amazing. Everyone in the biggest stars like you come in here, like they had a 1, they had a 0, and by the way, a 0 is better than a 1 because then you have to do it.
Yeah.
0, it's like, I'm out of here. I'll just
if you just have 1, you have to really do a big long inscription.
Yeah. Best fly fishing spot in the world, so the audience knows you are a terrific fly fisherman.
For me, it's the Bahamas. I get to the Bahamas every time I can get there. Yeah, and also I love Montana for freshwater, for trout fishing. But I mean, I grew up in South Florida, bone fishing, tarpon, all that stuff, and so for me to get in the Bahamas, where you just miles and miles of nothing but beautiful water, so that's for me.
Are you sort of standing in the shallows?
You can wade, wading, or you're from a skiff, yeah. But you're in shallow water, so you see every light, all the sharks, stingrays, turtles, everything, and you're right there with it. It's pretty amazing. Even if you're not
shark.
Well, you break them off if you can. But they come up and try to eat the fish that you hook, and then it gets interesting. There's whole stories. Yeah, some of the sharks over there are very bold, and I was wading in Bimini, and one came just right at me. Usually they turn away, and they don't, and I hit him with the butt of the fly rod instrument. But can I tell you a quick Jimmy Buffett story? Last time I saw him in the Bahamas, it was about 9 months before he passed away, but he had been fishing in the Bahamas, and he was wading, and they had a drone up filming him, and a lemon shark must have been 10 feet long comes up, and you see it, and Jimmy can't see him yet, but he's coming straight there, and they're trying to signal him because he's trying to catch a permit, and the shark comes, and Jimmy finally sees it and just puts his rod in the water and does this, and the shark turns and goes away, but they have it all on camera, and he was all excited. He was already planning another tour. And that was going to be the video he was going to put up for the song Fins.
So you got out there like a fencer.
That's it. Literally and it was a big size shark. And so that's what happens. But he was so excited we were going to do it on the big screen and everything. I don't think he ever got to do that. But that's fishing in the Bahamas.
That video exists out there somewhere.
Oh, yeah. He had some great videos like that. Who knows where they are. Yeah.
Okay, here's the one the audience has been waiting to hear. A one-sentence description of Florida that you would give to a time traveler from centuries ago.
Well, I'd start out by saying, this is a place you should have come here a century ago before it changed. My sense would be you're too late.
I mean, the early day Flagler gets the railroads going down there. There's no air conditioning yet, so there's almost no living there.
No, and the mangroves and mosquitoes are incredible and all that. But I'm going back to my own childhood when you and you talked about the guys, reptile ranch and stuff.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
Trapper Nelson.
But I mean, we used to go out and fish. They were digging Alligator Alley, which is now I-75 that crosses between Broward County and Naples. And they were digging that highway, and we'd go out and we'd fish in the canals out there. We'd get in inner tubes to fly fish, inner tubes, and float along. And if we had caught some bass, they'd be on a stringer. This wasn't the brightest thing we'd ever done because alligators.
I was going to say, you've seen an alligator.
Yeah, well, one time that we're out, back then there's no cars going. Anyway, there's a state trooper, and you see his light, and he zips his siren. We get out, And what's up? What are we doing wrong? And he just points in the canal. There's about a 12-foot gator that's been following us.
Oh,
and he goes,
God.
"You boys get out of the water now." I mean, we were such knuckleheads, you know. But that's I think every tourist should kind of go through that moment of. Now it would be pythons probably, but.
I would love to be able to take a time machine back to 1950 South Florida, see Miami in the early days, and a more rural version of Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, and I mean it was more of a town kind of feeling.
Space stuff was all big in that early 70s too. I mean, Canaveral must have been amazing.
Well, when my first newspaper job in Cocoa, I mean it was there because it's called a Space Coast, and that newspaper got started because of everybody moving there that worked for NASA and all the space programs were going. So the launches you could watch from anywhere, and they shook the whole, no matter where you were, and it was astonishing. And I got to go cover a couple of the launches up close. You know, it was a different. Now they're of course using Elon's launching like 3 satellites a week. Yeah, with this. I guess his sperm is in it or something. I don't know what it's shooting up.
Yeah, he's active in that department for sure.
Sorry,
book that has most influenced your journalist and/or novelist careers.
I had to think about this one. There was I'd have to say, in terms of opening up your eyes to what you could do, Catch-22 with Joseph Heller. My dad gave me that to read. And it blew me away, the possibility, of writing something about as ghastly and grim as war and making you laugh on every page. I didn't know that was possible to do as a writer, but that's what Joseph Heller did brilliantly. And I thought, wow, this. So I remember that book opening my eyes. It blew me away that somebody could tackle a subject like that, bravely tackle. And of course he'd been in World War II, but the idea that you're laughing about this, but then I figured out if you get it and you're the reader and you're of satire, you're laughing for the right reason. And if you can get readers to laugh for the right reason, you got something.
It reminds me of what you were saying earlier about getting the vernacular right of certain people like cops and soldiers, and something Nelson DeMille did so well, who was a very funny, witty writer, often wrote about soldiers and cops, but he had that gallows humor that soldiers and cops have.
They do. And it's a survival mechanism. Yeah. If you're in those jobs, you have to have that kind of dark humor and to get it, and certainly Catch-22 had that. And another one that affected me because it was in Florida, and it was the first really Florida Keys novel I had read was 92 in the Shade by Tom McGuane, and that blew me away just for the sheer gymnastics of the language, but also he captured Key West and the Keys where I'd spent so much time, and I loved it down there. And the whole improbably the hero is a fishing guide, a flats guy down there, but all the drama that goes along with that, I thought, man, so you can write about this kind of a really local place, but you write about it in a way that appeals to people who don't even live in Florida and who still get it. So those are the kind of books, not that you could or would want to try to imitate them. It would be impossible. But again, opening the door of possibilities, what you could do as a writer, what the rules and the boundaries were, change that.
Yeah. That's great. All right, last question for the terrific and talented Carl Hiaasen. One piece of advice for the audience.
One piece of, just for the audience in general?
It could be on writing or life, whatever.
It would be keep your dogs on a leash.
It sounds like you had some recent personal experience with.
I love dogs, but no, I've had. If you're in Florida, you have to do that because we have pythons.
Oh, the dogs get eaten. I was looking for dogs protection.
Yeah, so and I tell all tourists and friends of mine who come in, you have a dog, keep it on a leash.
Oh, that's good.
But I think it's a metaphor for.
That is a very Floridian answer. I love it. Carl, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you for spending the time and thank you for the cocktail.
Cheers.
Yeah, good breakfast.